Now, Bruce, just look right into the camera lens right here and tell us your name, your age, and where you were born.
My last name is Lee, Bruce Lee.
Jet Li has never responded to the comparisons that have been made between him and Bruce Lee. Fans have been debating their abilities for years, but Jet Li has never participated in the discussion. Up until this point, he only shared his thoughts with himself. In regard to Bruce Lee, he is finally breaking his silence for the very first time. The revelation that he just made has left everyone in a state of shock. His statements are extraordinary and unanticipated, and they have the potential to alter people's perceptions of Bruce Lee for all time. Did he just admit something that nobody anticipated he would say? In this video, we will finally reveal what Jet Li told Bruce Lee about his feelings towards him. The Shared Martial Arts Foundation recognizes Jet Li and Bruce Lee as two of the most accomplished martial artists who have ever appeared on the big screen. They were both committed to martial arts, despite the fact that their styles were distinct from one another. Beginning at a young age, Jet Li began his training in wushu, eventually rising to the highest levels of competition and becoming a national champion in China. Jeet Kune Do, on the other hand, is a martial art that was developed by Bruce Lee. It is characterized by its emphasis on efficiency and adaptability. Both of these gentlemen devoted their entire lives to perfecting their craft by perpetually training to become masters of their movements. In spite of the fact that Jet Li has only occasionally mentioned Bruce Lee, it is impossible to ignore the parallels that exist between their respective paths. Both of them consisted of more than just actors and actresses. In order to demonstrate martial arts in the most effective manner possible, they were masters of their craft and pushed themselves to the boundary of their capabilities. The information is not yet complete. Keep an eye out for further information. The filming of martial arts was fundamentally altered by Bruce Lee. Prior to his arrival, scenes depicting martial arts in films were either sluggish or overly dramatic. Not only did he bring speed and precision to the screen, but he also brought real combat techniques. There was no one who could match his presence, and his movements were explosive. He was demonstrating that martial arts could display both beauty and lethality at the same time. After the release of his film The Big Boss in 1971, he became a Hong Kong superstar. And then, in 1972, he released Fist of Fury, which took his fame to a whole new level. However, it was Enter the Dragon, which was released in 1973, that made him a worldwide phenomenon. It is a great tragedy that he passed away just prior to the release of that film. However, the impact of that film ensured that his legacy will never be forgotten. Due in large part to the influence of Bruce Lee, the martial arts film industry was already a massive one by the time Jet Li began his career in the film industry in the 1980s. Nevertheless, Jet Li had a distinctive style. Jet Li possessed movements that were precise, controlled, and elegant, in contrast to Bruce Lee, who possessed an energy that was more akin to street fighting and raw power. This resulted from his years of training in wushu for competitive purposes. After playing his first significant role in Shaolin Temple, he became a well-known figure in China. As a result of the film's enormous success, many individuals were able to experience real Shaolin Kung Fu for the very first time. While Bruce Lee's characters were typically lone fighters who faced off against corrupt figures, Jet Li frequently played historical heroes, warriors, and monks who exemplified discipline and honor. He followed in Bruce Lee's footsteps, but in his own unique way, Jet Li became one of the most famous martial artists in the world as his career progressed, and he advanced in his career. It was his performance in Once Upon a Time in China in the 1990s that established him as a legend, particularly in the realm of Hong Kong cinema. He demonstrated his incredible speed, flexibility, and mastery of traditional Chinese martial arts by playing the role of Wong Fei Hung, a legendary Chinese folk hero. His strikes were lightning-fast and acrobatic, and they frequently featured wirework that gave the impression that they were almost superhuman. The approach that was taken was distinct from the grounded and brutal fighting style that Bruce Lee was known for, but both men shared the same objective, which was to introduce martial arts to the world in the most exciting way that was possible. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Jet Li had relocated to Hollywood, following in the footsteps of Bruce Lee, who had done the same thing in the early 1970s. His debut in the Hollywood film industry came in the role of the antagonist in the film Lethal Weapon 4, in which he played a dangerous Chinese gangster who hardly spoke but stole every scene he appeared in. The audience was taken aback by his speed and precision because they had never witnessed anything like it before. It was through this role that he was able to establish himself as a leading man in Hollywood, much like Enter the Dragon had done for Bruce Lee many years earlier. Starring alongside Aaliyah, Jet Li made his debut in the Hollywood film industry with the film Romeo Must Die, in which he played the lead role. When a Chinese martial artist was portrayed as a mainstream Hollywood action hero, it was one of the first times that this had ever happened. In the 1960s, Bruce Lee attempted to accomplish something comparable with the film The Green Hornet, and later with Enter the Dragon. But his career was tragically cut short after both of these attempts. Jet Li, on the other hand, was given the opportunity to carry on something that Bruce had begun, demonstrating that martial artists from China could be more than just supporting characters or antagonists in Hollywood films. Both Bruce Lee and Jet Li have acquired the status of cultural icons, serving as representatives of Chinese martial arts and philosophy on a global scale. Bruce Lee was not only a fighter, he also spoke about the importance of self-improvement, breaking down barriers, and discovering one's own path in life, especially later in his career, when he focused on roles that highlighted discipline, morality, and the deeper meaning behind martial arts. Jet Li carried a message that was very similar to this one. His film Fearless, which was released in 2006, was a tribute to the philosophy of martial arts. It demonstrated that true strength is not just about fighting, but also about self-control and wisdom, which is something that Bruce Lee also deeply believed in for himself. Bruce Lee's influence can be seen in every aspect of modern martial arts film, including Jet Li's career. Although Jet Li has never been the type to make bold statements about his influences, it is evident that Bruce Lee's influence lives on in every aspect of modern martial arts film. Whether it was breaking into Hollywood, introducing martial arts to new audiences, or inspiring millions of people to take up martial arts, Bruce Lee laid the foundation upon which Jet Li and a great number of other individuals have built. Your excitement is at an all-time high, and things are about to take a turn for the better. It is true that Bruce Lee and Jet Li are both legendary figures in the world of martial arts. However, their fighting styles couldn't be more dissimilar. When it came to efficiency, power, and speed, Bruce Lee was all about it. In his opinion, it was a waste of energy to engage in movements that were not necessary. The punches and kicks that Bruce Lee used were powerful and direct, and they were intended to put an end to a fight as quickly as possible. When he strikes, it is like a bolt of lightning, and you can see this very clearly in his movies. It was important to him to demonstrate his raw strength and the reality of combat in his fight scenes. He believed that a fighter should be flexible and able to incorporate the most effective techniques from a variety of martial arts, rather than adhering to rigid traditions. This was the foundation of his Jeet Kune Do methodology. On the other hand, Jet Li comes from an entirely different background than the rest of the audience. His training was in wushu, a form of Chinese martial arts that is characterized by a high level of discipline and artistic expression. The approach that Bruce Lee takes to street fighting is different from wushu, which emphasizes balance, agility, and grace. Jet Li's movements are so fluid that they almost look like dance moves. His kicks, spins, and jumps are so smooth that they are almost like dance moves. The fighting that he does in his films appears to be almost effortless, as if he is gliding through the confrontation. His approach is characterized by dexterity and regulation. This gives the impression that his action sequences are more like works of art than they are, rather than a brutal street fight. Both of their fighting styles were distinct from one another, and so were their personalities. Bruce Lee was a brazen and outspoken individual. He had no problem expressing his thoughts, whether they were about breaking racial barriers in Hollywood, philosophy, or martial arts. He was not afraid to speak his mind. He never stopped elaborating on the more profound significance of combat, in which he explained that martial arts was not only about punching and kicking, but also about the development of the individual. During interviews, he would confidently explain why traditional martial arts needed to evolve and why fighters should be free from rigid forms. He would go on to perform other interviews. Despite this, Jet Li has always been much more reserved than other people. Not only does he not talk as much about his personal philosophy, but he also does not attempt to challenge the world of martial arts in the same way that Bruce Lee did. Rather than that, he allows his work to speak for itself. Among the many things that set them apart from one another is their spiritual beliefs. Although Bruce Lee had a profound philosophical understanding, he was not affiliated with any particular religion. A combination of Taoism, Buddhism, and Western ideas comprised his philosophical outlook. He was a firm believer in the importance of self-improvement and the pursuit of one's own path. Jet Li, on the other hand, is a passionate Buddhist. Both his perspective on martial arts and his outlook on life in general have been influenced by his Buddhist beliefs. Instead of focusing on dominating an opponent, he views martial arts as a means of developing self-discipline and maintaining equilibrium. In the later stages of his career, this became even more apparent in the films that he chose to star in, where he frequently played characters who prioritized peace over confrontation. It was for this reason that he placed such a high value on a film like Fearless. Neither was it merely a movie about action. It was a manifestation of the beliefs that he held. Jet Li had already established a name for himself in the entertainment industry by the early 2000s. Although he had already achieved success in the Chinese film industry, he was now moving on to a much more significant stage. This was his first major Hollywood film, and it was Lethal Weapon 4, which introduced him to audiences in the West as a villain who was silent but deadly. After that, he appeared in Romeo Must Die, in which he played the lead role alongside Aaliyah, demonstrating that he was capable of being more than just the antagonist. Around the same time, he had a starring role in The One, a science fiction action movie that gave him the opportunity to experiment with various fighting styles. The film combined traditional martial arts with visual effects that were reminiscent of Hollywood. Over the course of this time period, Bruce Lee had already passed away for nearly 30 years, but his legacy was more powerful than it had ever been. Movies about martial arts were all over the place, and Hollywood was more enthusiastic than ever before about embracing them. Late in the 1990s and early in the 2000s, there was a surge of martial arts films that were released to mainstream audiences. Jackie Chan was bringing his own comedic style to Hollywood action films at the same time that films like The Matrix were heavily borrowing from Bruce Lee's philosophy. An additional demonstration of the extent to which Bruce Lee had influenced the development of martial arts filmmaking was provided by the fact that Jet Li was entering a field that had already been influenced by Bruce Lee. Don't miss the next scene, which will make things even more interesting than they already are. Jet Li discusses Bruce Lee in his speech. Jet Li has never been one to brag about his own accomplishments, but when he finally spoke about Bruce Lee, there was no denying the admiration that he expressed for him. The fact that Bruce was not merely another martial artist was made abundantly clear by him. He was a powerful force that gave everything a new form. Jet acknowledged that things would have been much more difficult for him if Bruce had not been part of his life. In the past, Bruce had the ability to open doors that others, including himself, could only possibly imagine entering. Is it possible that a Chinese martial artist could be the director of a Hollywood movie? Until Bruce came along, that was an unimaginable possibility. Because Bruce had fought those battles decades earlier, the industry was already prepared to accept an Asian action star by the time Jet arrived in Hollywood. This was entirely due to the fact that Bruce had fought those battles. But opening doors was not the only thing that was involved. The raw physicality that Bruce brought to the screen was something that Jet could not ignore. He referred to Bruce's speed and power as revolutionary, stating that it was unlike anything that people previously had witnessed. It was necessary for the directors to adjust the pace of his punches in order for the audience to actually comprehend what was taking place. Before taking his kicks, the stuntmen braced themselves because Bruce's kicks weren't just for show. They actually hit hard, despite their appearance. Jet never attempted to compete with anyone else, despite the fact that he was extremely quick and precise himself. Bruce Lee was referred to as a force of nature by Jet Li, who also lauded the physical abilities of Bruce Lee. The movements that Bruce Lee performed were unlike anything that the world had ever seen before. Because his punches were so quick, the directors had to slow down the footage in order to ensure that the audience could have a clear view of them. The force of his kicks was so great that they sent stuntmen flying across the set he was working on. Although Jet Li is a master in his own right, he has always acknowledged that Bruce Lee's explosiveness was on a different level than whatever Jet Li had achieved. Prior to Bruce, martial arts were either regarded as a mysterious and ancient tradition or disregarded as something that belonged in kung fu schools. Bruce changed both of these perceptions. Bruce made it into something that is applicable everywhere. Not only did he make people respect it as a method of combat, but he also made it respectable as a mentality and a way of life. This impact extended far beyond the realm of films, as it had an effect on generation after generation. Jet had a profound comprehension of this, as he, in his own unique way, was tasked with the same mission. Both of them had the same goal: to demonstrate to the world the splendor of Chinese martial arts. Both of their approaches were, without a doubt, completely dissimilar to one another. Jet has always placed an emphasis on the fluidity and artistry of wushu, in contrast to Bruce's style, which was extremely direct and efficient. Now, due to the fact that their approaches to martial arts were drastically different, he never attempted to imitate Bruce. When it came to winning a fight, Bruce was all about breaking down traditions and discovering the quickest and most effective way to victory. Are you of the opinion that Jet Li's statements about Bruce Lee are accurate? The one-inch punch, also known as Bruce Lee's one-inch punch, is the most famous move in the history of professional martial arts. As its name suggests, the one-inch punch is a technique that is utilized by martial artists to strike targets at a distance that is extremely close to them. One thing that sets it apart from other forms of assault is the idea that, if executed correctly, an attacker can use sufficient force to bring down his opponent. Bruce Lee's one-inch punch earned widespread recognition as early as the 1960s, approximately 10 years before Lee rose to prominence as a global martial arts celebrity. The film was released in the United States. When Lee performed it at the Beach Karate National Championship, he earned a lot of attention and became famous. During that time period, the martial arts community paid a great deal of attention to him. During the time that Lee's notoriety was growing, there was a significant increase in interest in his one-inch punch. Lee is still the most well-known practitioner of the technique, despite the fact that he is responsible for making the move so well-known that it is now utilized by a number of well-known martial artists who practice different styles of kung fu. Have a watchful eye. There is a growing sense of intrigue in the narrative. It was not overnight that Lee came up with the idea for the one-inch punch in 1964. Chinese martial arts in general, as well as the training he received when he was a teenager, served as the inspiration for this. Lee's expertise in martial arts began in the 1950s, when he began training under Wing Chun Grandmaster Wing Chun. Wing Chun was the one who established the foundation for Lee's style of kung fu, which is known as Jeet Kune Do. Due to the fact that Wing Chun is a fighting style that is suited for close quarters, the tenets of the one-inch punch are derived from its theory. As a result of his training in Wing Chun, Lee was already familiar with techniques that were designed for combat that took place among close quarters. Before the one-inch punch was shown to the general public, James DeMille, who was Bruce Lee's student, offered some insight into the artistic process that Lee used to create the film. The claim that he made was that Lee had developed an improved version of a Wing Chun move that was already well known. Lee made an effort to shorten the technique by experimenting with different stances and angles. He believed that the technique would be more effective if it was performed from a closer range. After some time, they discovered a combination that was successful. Lee once demonstrated its power by throwing someone 16 feet back and landing them squarely in a chair while they were sitting down. Lee's accomplishments can be attributed to a number of factors, including his accuracy, instant execution, speed, which is a crucial quality for which the actor is currently well known, and the precise angle at which he accomplished it. The speed with which Bruce Lee executed his one-inch punch is one of the reasons why so few martial artists have been able to replicate it so successfully. This is also one of the reasons why the punch is so powerful. Lee's father was the one who instructed him in the fundamentals of martial arts. While Lee was still in his teenage years, he became involved in gang conflicts in Hong Kong, which led to a significant number of street fights. When it came to Lee's development as a martial artist, the most significant influence was the Wing Chun training that he received. Following a series of defeats at the hands of members of competing gangs, Lee, then 16 years old, began training in Wing Chun under Ip Man in the latter half of 1956 and the early part of 1957. Ip's regular lessons predominantly consisted of free sparring, form practice, sticking hand drills, and techniques involving wooden dummies. Free sparring was also a component. A schedule that was predetermined was not followed by the classes. The boxing training that Lee received from Edward, who was the coach of the St. Francis Xavier's college boxing team, took place between the years 1956 and 1958. In the final of the Hong Kong Schools Boxing Championship in 1958, Lee won the fight by knockout against Gary Elms, who was the reigning champion at the time. Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight boxing champion, had a significant influence on Lee after he moved to the United States. During the 1960s, Lee was able to observe Ali's moves and incorporate them into his own style of boxing. Training in mixed martial arts was something that Lee advocated for, and he was particularly interested in grappling. In addition to Jean LaBelle, Lee received instruction from a number of judo practitioners in Seattle and California. These practitioners included Fred Sato, Jesse Glover, Taki Kimura, Hayward Nishioka, and Wally J. He spent as much time studying as he did teaching, and a significant number of his early students were trained in judo and other forms of martial arts. Lee became friends with LaBelle while working on the set of The Green Hornet. He offered to teach him striking arts in exchange for learning grappling techniques by offering to teach him striking arts. Lee's grappling techniques. Notable grapplers. Lou Thez and Ed Lewis had instructed LaBelle in catch wrestling, and fundamental judo and catch wrestling techniques can be found in Lee's Tao of Jeet Kune Do. LaBelle had learnt these techniques from Lee. Additionally, Jihan Jai, the instructor of Hapkido, also instructed him in some grappling techniques. The most significant observation that Lee made regarding the ineffectiveness of judo, according to Glover, was regarding the ability to seize the opponent. During the first training session that they had together, Glover showed Lee how to perform an Osoto Gari. Although Lee thought it was a good technique, he did not appreciate the fact that Glover had to cling to Lee. Living in Seattle provided Lee with the opportunity to acquire the skills necessary to avoid being tackled or taken to the ground by opponents. It was stated by Glover that Lee would not fall to the ground if he was able to get you to remain standing. Despite this, Lee expressed to LaBelle his desire to incorporate judo into his fighting technique. The Osoto Gari was one of the judo throws, arm locks, and chokeholds that he added to Jeet Kune Do alongside other techniques. In some of his films, Lee demonstrated grappling moves, such as in the movie Way of the Dragon, in which his character finishes off Chuck Norris with a neck hold that was inspired by LaBelle. Due to the fact that it did not have a visually distinguishable appearance, Lee believed that grappling was not very useful in action choreography. Additionally, in Game of Death, Lee and Han Jai engage in a verbal exchange of grappling techniques, and Lee employs wrestling as a means of subduing the character of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's. An additional factor that had an effect on Lee was the training regimen of the Great Gama, who was a wrestling champion from India, Pakistan, who was famous for his strength in the grappling hold. The workouts that Gama provided were incorporated into Lee's routine. Of course, that is not all. Mr. Bruce Lee, also known as the Dragon Flag, was an extreme sportsman. It was his widow, Linda Lee, who stated that he would watch athletes on television perform full splits and that he would never pass up an opportunity to exercise. According to Bruce's wife, he would spend almost every minute of the day practicing and honing his skills whenever he had the opportunity. He was well aware that in order to become the best martial artist in the world, he would have to put in a significant amount of time practicing and working out. Lee believed that the abdominal region, also known as the core, is involved in virtually every movement and is essential in martial arts. As a result, he placed the most importance on developing his core muscles out of all the muscles in his body. For the purpose of fortifying his core, Lee crafted what is now commonly referred to as the Dragon Flag in his honor. However, if you are unable to figure it out, it is considered to be one of the most difficult core exercises that are currently available. The move may have been popularized by Sylvester Stallone in Rocky IV, despite the fact that Lee did not play around with it. It is said that Lee was able to maintain his entire body on the edge of a bench with only his shoulders touching anything, while the rest of his body remained perfectly rigid and horizontal to the ground. Thankfully, Bruce made a decision in his life that was significantly more honorable. The comment section is where you should share your thoughts with us. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button on our channel. The next video that appears on your screen is one that you will enjoy watching if you click on it.